You know what, Joe, you're a campaigner to stop this. Is this the end of the road for you, or have you hit the buffers, as we might say?
Well, we don't know, because the thing is, although it's being trailed as a full decision to go ahead, we know it's not a full decision to go ahead because Phase 2B looks like it's going to be in review.
Right.
We're not sure that the Old Oak Common to Euston bit's going to get the go ahead as well. And the big question is whether there will be a caveat on this decision, whether or not the government is basically ignoring the fact that HS2 has to pass certain tests to achieve notice to proceed, or whether it's just going to get the green light and we don't care about management capability, affordability of contracts, or the robustness of the revised business case.
Right.
Because if you look into those three things, if those three tests still apply, there's no way it can pass, especially, as you said, the cost is over treble what it was originally, and in that 10 years, we've seen the links to Heathrow and the links to HS1 cut. So you could argue that it's probably quadruple what the cost of what we've got left is. It's now admitted that, of course, we can't have the 18 trains per hour, which is crucial. It might sound like a technical point, but the fact that we've said for 10 years you cannot do 18 trains per hour at those proposed speeds. It depends on technology that has not been invented. And finally, with Oakerby, they said, no, you can't do 18 trains per hour. And the point is that the business case is based on that, or the service pattern is based on that, and this illusionary freed-up capacity is all based on that. Every argument for HS2 is based on the fact that it can do 18 trains an hour, which it can't.
Well, this is the great thing about these big projects in Britain. One, we're not very good at them. Two, they never deliver what they say they can deliver, and they certainly never deliver it on time, and they certainly never deliver it on cost. Now we're being asked to believe that there's a sort of pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. I mean, can you imagine the mess that will be HS2 once it eventually actually starts? Because if you go back through, just to interrupt you for a second, Joe, I said that it was first announced in 2009, right? The project then received a green light in the coalition agreement of 2010, a green light from Justin Greening in 2011, a green light from David Cameron's cabinet in 2012, a green light from the Queen in 2013. It goes on and on and on. But in fact, the green light has meant nothing but a red light.
Yeah, and that's the thing. A red light's a great example because HS2 has been officially categorised as red by the Infrastructure and Projects Authority, the government's own watchdog into projects, reported twice last year and said that the programme was unachievable. It was unachievable. That's what your own watchdog's saying, Boris. You're not going to pay any attention to that. And, it's also got the massive environmental damage because it's been designed for 250 miles an hour, which means it is straight and it is wide. So it's as if it maximises the environmental damage it does. And, of course, the cost, not just for building it, but for running it as well. And we've got this small matter of the fact that, there's a serious fraud office investigation going on. That was reported back in August that the Serious Fraud Office were investigating HS2, that there have been allegations of fraud, bribery and corruption.
Well, they've managed to spend billions and billions of pounds without laying a single line of track, haven't they?
Yes, yeah. And, well, you can make a lot of that back because a lot of that is the land that you've cleared in Birmingham and London, and obviously in the cases where they've actually paid for the farms that they seized, because a lot of the time they haven't actually paid. If you're a homeowner, you get paid. You might not get paid what your house is worth, but if you're a farmer or a business owner, pretty much you're not getting actually paid when they've seized your land so far, which, again, I would say that's another breach of the 2006 Fraud Act because you're causing people a loss, and HS2 seem to think that they can get away with anything. And that's the problem with this. All of these issues that I've just brought up are basically saying to HS2 Limited, you can get away with anything. It doesn't matter what the facts are. None of the evidence, none of the facts matter. We're going to do it for the sake of doing it. And, unfortunately, this is looking like we're getting the bungling Boris that we always feared we could get, because this is going to be Boris's blunder. And it's just a real shame that he can't see that.
Who's he caving into here? Because I'm always interested in who the money men are in these kind of situations. We've been told by, I think it was one of the former members of the review panel who we spoke to here. I think it was Lord Clark or something like that. I can't remember his name. But he basically, Lord Berkeley, I think, he came on and said it was a colossal waste of money, that the actual costings hadn't been done properly, that it was a complete and utter fallacy to suggest that, because it's already cost $5 billion, you should just spend another $100 billion because it would be dangerous to cancel it.
No, this is the thing. You're having all these arguments that are put forward, but none of them stand up to any scrutiny whatsoever. And it's been because, right from the start, there was never an assessment of what was needed for Britain's transport infrastructure. It was just a load of vested interest lobbyists went to Lord Adonis and said, you know what, Andrew, what we'd really like is for you to let us build the most expensive railway in the history of the planet. You're all right with that, aren't you? And it was the most expensive railway, mile for mile, in the history of the planet, back when it only cost 32.7 billion quid. Not now that it's going to cost, 116 is actually the latest estimate, because that was Tony Barker's 108.
Yeah.
It didn't include trains. The 106 from the government doesn't include trains.
And also, surely, to heavens, by the time we actually get on the train itself, even though we were supposed to be getting on it this very year, according to Lord Adonis in 2009, it'll be obsolete, won't it?
Well, absolutely. The very last thing you want, if you want a sustainable economy into the future, the very last thing you want to do is encourage more and more people to travel greater and greater distances for work. What you need is sustainable local transport, something that's actually going to get people out of their cars, something that's going to, people in, you look at the Northern franchise, it actually forced people back into their cars. It's been so terrible, the crush hour conditions that people have been, facing there. And what's HS2 going to do? And maybe it'll be these supposed benefits, trickle-down benefits of HS2 that might arrive in 20-odd, 30-odd years. No, you need that investment in local transport infrastructure, and you need it now. Great example, here where I live, Kenilworth, we had our station reopened last year. It carried 170,000 passengers in 11 months.
Right.
Just going one train now to Coventry, one train now to Leamington. 170,000 journeys taken off the car with one station.
Yes.
Because it was a train station that took people where they wanted
Exactly
to go
right.
to work.
Well, every time I see any kind of questioning of people living in the north of England, in any part of the north of England outside of Manchester, basically, they're not really interested in HS2. They don't see HS2 as helping them at all.
Even the leader, even Julie Dore, who's the leader of Sheffield City Council, has already said it's not going to help it improve transport links in the north. It's a white elephant, and it's going to Sheffield. And if you can't, if you haven't even got the leader of Sheffield City Council on board, then why are you bothering? And what you've got is, as you said, follow the money. George Osborne knew that HS2 was over budget and couldn't be delivered on time when he was Chancellor. That's a matter of public record. The first thing he does, though, when he gets out of office, is he goes and sets up Northern Powerhouse Partnership, which spends all of its time lobbying for HS2. And oddly enough, when you look at the corporate members of Northern Powerhouse Partnership, there's a very distinct correlation between people who are the companies that are members of Northern Powerhouse Partnership and the companies that are getting contracts for HS2. It's odd, that, isn't it?
It really is.
People lobbying for it are making money out of it.
And well, that's the point. I mean, this is the other thing that depresses me about the way that government works in this country. It seems to work for the powerful and the few. It does not work for the many. If you live in Sheffield and you have to go to London for a job for one reason or another, there's already a pretty good way of getting there. You're not going to be worried about a new HS2 that takes you there a bit faster to a different part of town. And the tickets, by the way, are not going to be cheap, are they?
No. We said right from the start, HS2 is a fast train for fat cats. The long distance intercity journeys are the preserve of the business elite. They're the they're the trains for the people who can afford them. They're not what the vast majority of rail users use. They're not what the vast majority of commuters use. They're what the people who are in the executive and political class who may travel to London once or twice a week. And it's very obvious. It's very obvious that you need the transport infrastructure for the journeys that people actually take. And there are so many arguments put up for HS2 that are just absolutely ridiculous. Like, we have got no capacity between London and Birmingham, for example. Network Rail have just said that there's no physical room for any more trains between London and Birmingham. The new franchise holder, Avanti, has said they can add 263 trains a week. That's 2 an hour with just minor tweaks.
Yeah.
Right? So there is clearly the capacity there, but you've got these people who have a vested interest in seeing HS2 built, who just say, no, we've got to do it. It's the only thing that can possibly be done.
Yes.
And, they sort of ignore the existence of the Chiltern line.
Right.
You ignore the existence, if you're talking about capacity from Birmingham to Leeds or Birmingham to Manchester, those trains are half the size of the ones that go from Birmingham, Leeds or Manchester to London. So it's not difficult to figure out how you can double capacity there.
They've also ignored the fact that you can't get to a lot of these stations because there's no bus service from whichever village you happen to live in. Boris now says, I presume this is a sop to the backbenchers who don't want HS2 to happen, that he's going to give £5 billion around the country to various different regions to get better bus services, more clean bus services, bus lanes and cycle lanes. Well, I could tell him, and I'm sure you could tell him as well, around Kenilworth, you can't put bus lanes in the countryside because there's no room.
No, that's it. This is the thing. And you look at some of the villages around here where HS2 is going through, places like Burton Green, that have, basically, they are cut off from the bus service now. There is a bus between Burton Green and Kenilworth now once a week. And that's like 2-3 miles. Yeah. And that's just ridiculous. And it's not even on market day, for God's sake. But you look at things like this. Well, my mum has seen the bus services that she used cut. And yes, we need this local transport infrastructure, but it is a sop that is being given now. This $5 billion is not going to go very far. You need something that is more sustainable, something that is going to work forever. Like, a great example is the reversal of some of the beaching cuts. Like, for example, one that we've kept mentioning quite recently a lot is Skipton to Cole. Yeah. The trackbed's still there. It's 11 miles to track. There's a road that you'd have to get out of the way, so you'd have to build a road bridge. That's about the only bit of the trackbed that's been built on. And for that, you can, for 368 million, that gives you a brand new line across the Pennines.
Yes. Well, there's a whole list of about 50. There's a whole list of about 50 different projects that they could have done instead of HS2, which would have been ready in 3 years' time, which would have helped the infrastructure of this country, and which would have cost half the amount that HS2 is costing. There is no way in the world that anybody can tell me or make an argument that HS2 is a good idea. Yeah, and politically as well, a lot of these things like Skipton and Cole, again, a great example. For Boris, that delivers for your Red Wall seats like Keighley, like Burnley. Why would you not do that? And, again, the Woodhead Tunnel is another one that gives you another line across the Pennines for less than 1% of the cost of HS2. And when you look at it in that context, you've got to wonder, why is this ever got on the table? And why it's got on the table is it's a gravy train. It's the consultants, the construction firms literally are running their own gravy train, demanding that they get to build the most expensive railway in the history of the planet. And you will notice that the more the costs have gone up, the more you've seen business leaders saying, oh, no, it's absolutely essential, it's vital, it's a game changer, it's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, it's transformational. All this bombastic, fact-free rhetoric has been used to prop up the case for this by people who are going to make money out of building it and the associated land grabs. Like, there was one on the telly last night saying, oh, look, we're already seeing around Birmingham International that it's a boost for business. And what that boost for business was is that you've got a property speculator coming in and buying up the office blocks because they know they'll be able to rent them out for more money. Oh, I know. And all the prices of everything around HS2 will go up. So from what I can gather, Joe, you're still just as fired up as you ever were. You're not going quietly, and you're going to try and still stop it, are you?
Yeah, well, we wait and see if notice to proceed is still required, because we simply cannot see how HS2 could pass notice to proceed. And, the other one is pushing for the outcome of the Serious Fraud Office. And the other thing that Boris, I really don't know how he hasn't spotted this, quite frankly, and the advisors haven't spotted this. But in some of those fraud allegations, there is a suggestion that an American firm may have been involved. And if that's the case, the Securities and Exchange Commission in America might look at it under the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. And do you really want that going on during your post-Brexit trade negotiations with Donald Trump? Do you really think he's not going to bring that up? That's just insanity. And I don't think they spotted this at all. And that could be a right mess.
Well, it certainly is a right mess already. Listen, I'm going to let you go, Joe, but I'm sure we'll be talking again. We're going to talk to Andrew Bridgen MP coming up in a little while as well, because he is hopping mad about this too. What is Boris Johnson thinking? Why has he gone with HS2 when he could have saved us all a bucket load of money and done something better with it? And as for putting bus lanes in the countryside, I think he's finally cracked, because that is the most ludicrous idea I've ever heard. And cycle lanes as well. There's no room on the roads. Have you not been to the countryside recently?
You can consider putting Boris on Plank of the Week.
I'm thinking seriously about it, I'll tell you what.
Yeah, well, honest to God, like Crewe here, centre of the universe for trains and HS2. Well, none of the locals want it because it's causing chaos already. The infrastructure can't cope with all the building work that's going on, the infrastructure, housing estates being built around it. It's already in place. Speculators have moved in, and house prices around here are just shooting up. It's money that's coming in from outside.
Yeah, of course it is. And why on earth do we, as a country, have to take this length of time to build anything? You know, why can they get a go-ahead in 2009 and we're still talking about building it in 2020? That's 11 years it's taken to agree to do it.
Well, the good thing is it was a bad idea in 2009, and it's a bad idea in 2020. Look, Boris is a disaster for me already. Let's list off what he's done to me already. He's taken my gas boiler. He's taken my diesel car from me. He's promoted to the House of Lords, who've just given themselves a pay increase. He's gone with Huawei, which is, well, part of the CCP of China, and now he's going to spend $100 billion of my money on a white elephant.
I know.
What's
I know.
he done wrong?
I don't know what's gone wrong with him. He's been sort of the pod people have turned up and turned him into a complete idiot. It would seem.
Well, I would love to know how much in kickbacks are going back to Tory HQ from all the builders and contractors who've got this work. Because, as that guy said, it's a blank cheque for these builders now.
Well, of course it is, because, I mean, there's no guarantee, first of all, in my book, that it sticks at 100 billion. You know, it was originally estimated at 3 billion, right? Now, that is a factor of 33 times what it was supposed to cost, right? I mean, it's ridiculous.
If it comes in under 150 billion, I'll make a donation of 1 week's wage to the Dogs Trust, and you can pick which one you wanted to go to for the dogs, because this is just going to bankrupt us.
And there is no point to it. There is no benefit to it. Nobody wants it, apart from those people who are making money out of it. Gerard, great call. Thank you very much indeed. We've got some great tweets coming in as well. You can tweet us, of course, at Talk Radio, at IROMG, and I'll read them out. Here's one from Mr. J. He says, Boris has a history of harebrained vanity projects. Remember the bendy buses ended up being scrapped. The Garden Bridge idea, which was scrapped. Millions of pounds of consultancy fees are still unaccounted for. The Thames Estuary Airport scrapped. He obviously does want to have some kind of legacy in bricks and mortar, or something that he can point to and say, oh, yeah, that's what I made. I made HS2. Well, I'm sorry, Boris. It may well be that by the time HS2 actually runs its first train from Birmingham to London, or shall I say into West London, which is nowhere near the centre of London, you'll actually no longer be Prime Minister.
I predicted in 2013 that when the budget was 32 billion, that it was going to go to over 100 billion. I think even I didn't expect that it would happen in 7 years, and now they want another 20 years. We're supposed to expect that having trebled in 7, it's not going to help in another 20.
Yeah, well, I was looking back at the sort of the rundown of events, and it was 2009 when Lord Adonis first mooted this as an idea, and he said the first trains will be running in 2020. Well, guess what? It's 2020 now, and we're still 10 years away.
Not a yard of track has been laid. We're about 12 billion into a project which I think realistically now you've got to expect to be well over 200 billion.
Yeah.
It's a monster, and you can't feed monsters, Mike. You've got to kill them, otherwise they eat you in the end. And I think this is a project that will come back to haunt Boris Johnson and my government.
Right. And what is the kind of vested interest that he's playing to here? Because you think Boris Johnson was elected to be a man of the people. He's supposed to be paying back those people in the north of England who voted for him. I don't know anyone in the north of England who is an ordinary individual who's in favour of HS2. They'd much rather see better infrastructure for their own local rail services. You know, who's he appeasing here?
Well, I understand there's been a big lobby by big businesses and engineering companies involved in the project who are claiming that it will devastate the engineering industry and cause job losses if the project doesn't go ahead now. The fact is, we've got lots of projects we could get on with, and what we need east-west communications and connectivity in the Midlands and the North to give critical mass to our Midlands and Northern cities to compete against the black hole of London that sucks in money and talent. And quite honestly, the faster people can get to London, the more it's going to draw out of the regions like mine, the East Midlands.
Exactly right. But also, I mean, all of the money they've already spent has been spent apparently on loads of consultants, loads of people who are on six-figure salaries. I don't even know what they do all day. Lots of compulsory purchasing of houses. I think even your house was compulsory purchase, wasn't it?
It was, but they didn't give me what I'd paid for it 5 years before.
Yeah.
A lot less money.
Right.
They're not paying the full price for the assets. The way that HS2 treat the public when they come into contact with them is disgraceful, quite honestly. Absolutely arrogant. It runs the whole length of my constituency, and it's the thing that upsets people in North West Leicestershire the most, because we'll be taking all of the pain, none of the gain. And now, with the extended timescale, I mean, it was first announced the route in 2013. It'll be 27 years of blight before the project's completed, if it goes ahead on schedule, which is unlikely, and we'll get no benefit from it whatsoever. And to add insult to injury, although my seat is the centre of population of the UK, we have no railway station within the constituency, and every time I ask government for £100 million to reopen the Ivanhoe line, they tell us we've got no money.
Yeah.
We could reopen the Ivanhoe line for less than 1,000th of the cost of HS2.
It's incredible, isn't it? I was just talking to a guy from the Stop HS2 campaign who said that they managed to get Kenilworth Station reopened, and not a million miles from where you are, and they actually managed to get 170,000 passengers travelling from that particular station in 1 year, thereby easing the congestion on the roads, by a factor of about 10. So, I mean, it makes absolute sense to give you guys stations where they are needed. This idea that we're going to give an extra $5 billion over to local bus services, to me, is an absolute joke, isn't it?
It is a joke, and if you actually work it out, even the constituencies who aren't directly adversely affected by the route, their constituents are going to be paying, on current estimates, around about £163 million for HS2. Imagine what that could be, what that could deliver in that constituency as far as local infrastructure and transport is concerned.
Now, there's plenty of you that are against it on the backbenches of the Tory party, about 60, I understand. I mean, is there anything you can do here?
Well, we have the power of the argument, and quite honestly, I think the majority of the public are with us on this, and this isn't going to go away. This is going to be, if we're not careful, this is going to be an albatross around the government's neck, and I don't doubt Labour are going to vote for it. They love spending taxpayers' money irresponsibly. And this is going to give them a stick with which to beat this government for decades to come. Yeah,
because it's always going to be behind budget, over budget rather, and behind its schedule. It's never going to be on time, and it's never going to come in on cost. I find it incredible. I mean, there's supposed to be a cabinet meeting going on at the moment. Isn't there anyone in cabinet telling Boris Johnson what we're talking about here?
Well, I hope that people like Andrea Leadsom, who've always been against it, will speak up for what I believe is the majority of the country, who can see that this is very bad value for money. By the time it's completed, we'll have had driverless cars for probably more than a decade. And people are saying, why are you doing this?
Yeah, and we'll be flying around in cars probably as well.
Well, anything could have happened. But, I mean, what you've actually got is, this is the last chance, I think, realistically, to stop the project, and the best chance. And once it's through this gateway, you watch the budget spiral once they know that it can't be stopped.
Yeah.
I mean, it is unbelievable.
It really is. Andrew, listen, thanks a lot for your time. Andrew Bridgen, Conservative MP for North West Leicestershire, there, whose own home was on the line that had to be compulsorily purchased. I mean, everybody who is anywhere near this HS2 project, who's not actually making money out of it, is against it. Let's talk to Paul, who's up in Warrington. Hi, Paul.
Oh, hi, Mike. You all right?
Yeah, very well, sir. What can you tell me? Thank you. What can you say?
I was going to say that HS2. I think it's a joke,
Yeah, it is. Who's it going to benefit?
I think it's like the way like Insidious went through it all the way, because you're going to build something like you're saying, and the guy before Joe was saying, the first guy, he's trying to stop it. You build stuff like build different lines, like you say, different tracks.
Yeah, I mean, how good? I mean, if you wanted to go from Warrington to Newcastle, for example, how do you get there?
Yeah. Well, for me, you don't take wouldn't be able to take the HS2, would you?
Yeah, it's absolutely, it's absolutely ridiculous.
It's like in London as well, with all the lorries and the bicycle lanes. They're hardly using the.
I know. Listen, this idea of building, but you know, I mean, do you need a bus lane in Warrington? Do you need a bus lane anywhere outside of a major city? Of course you don't.
Really, no, we don't need a bus lane, really.
No.
You know what I mean? Because, it's so stupid. I mean, I find like the House of Lords. I bet HS2's not going through in the House of Lords houses, are they?
No, I shouldn't think so.
And
Absolutely
they're
not.
probably going to tax you anyway for 70 quid.
They've just given themselves a pay rise, Paul. Thank you very much for your call. Yeah, how about this, right? Lords have basically given themselves an inflation-busting pay rise, meaning they will now get 323 quid tax-free just for turning up for work. Now, it's not the fact that it's 323 quid. It's the fact that it's actually tax-free. They're getting a 3.1% pay hike, which means basically with 150 sessions a year, you can make, as a Lord, 50,000 quid tax-free. That's the equivalent of making about 80,000 quid before tax. That's nice work if you can get it, isn't it? Unbelievable what's going on in this country. We need to fix it, and we need to fix it now. Apparently all is not lost with HS2, so maybe we need to start up a proper campaign to stop Boris Johnson spending all of our money.
I think HS2's a marvellous idea.
Do you?
Yeah, I do. Our train lines were more or less built by a Queen Victoria.
Yeah.
The East Coast main line's got a squeegee point at over the Welling Viaduct.
Yeah.
So that slows it down. The West Coast main line snakes slowly around Berkhamsted and Hemel Hempstead.
Oh, I'm going to stop you there, Nick, though, because I've travelled on both of those lines, the East Coast Main Line and the West Coast Main Line, and they are both very efficient and quick ways of getting to Scotland or getting to Manchester or getting to Newcastle, whichever place you want to get to. We don't need to be able to get there 20 minutes quicker or even 30 minutes quicker.
Well, it's not. Edinburgh, for example, is 4 hours fastest train?
Something like that.
The high-speed line, if it went up there, would be 2 hours.
Yeah, it's not going up there, though, is it? Yeah, but it's not.
Well, I think it should.
Well, yeah, but you thinking it should... Yeah, but Nick, hang on. You thinking it should doesn't mean that it is. It's not going to get you to Edinburgh any quicker because it doesn't go to Edinburgh.
I think the plan is to extend it, and that makes sense. Stopping at Birmingham's a waste of time. It only shaves off.
Well, it's not stopping at Birmingham. It's going to Manchester. It's going to Sheffield.
Okay,
but that won't happen for 20 years, Nick. So it's going to be 2040. I don't know how old you are, but I'm not going to be using it in 20 years. I can tell you that.
I might. Only just.
Yeah, I mean, they might try fixing getting into London Bridge from Croydon, which is a much more difficult thing to do than it is to get from London to Edinburgh.
No, you're wrong, Mike. Blooming good now. Thameslink. Fantastic service, London Bridge Croydon.
As long as there's enough carriages on the train, as long as you obviously haven't tried doing it at rush hour, have you?
There's 12 hour coaches. Yeah, I do.
I used to take that train every single day from the other side of London, from the north, the one that comes down from Bedford, right?
Yeah.
And yes, it was a reasonably good train service. However, quite often you couldn't get on it because there was too many people.
I've never found that since the London Bridge crossover works and improvement works are done, and the new rolling stock. It is an excellent service.
All right.
And it's hugely improved the London Bridge area where you work.
Yes.
My favourite.
Well, London Bridge Station is great now. London Bridge Station is great. However, South Eastern trains are a disgrace, as are Southern. And I'm afraid, once you talk about Waterloo Station down the road and South West trains who have been on strike for an entire month of December, you can forget about it. But listen, Nick, it's good to hear somebody in favour of HS2. Are you one of those people who are happy today that this is all going ahead?
Well, first of all, let me just clarify, we're not a magazine, by the way. We are the industry's newspaper. And the industry's newspaper has always taken a neutral stance. We're not in favour of HS2 as such. Equally, we fully accept something's got to be done about capacity. And the main lines running north from London are already pretty well full. And that's a bit frightening because we won't see any part of HS2 for probably the best part of another 10 years. Yeah. And passenger demand is going up all the time. Also, there is plenty of pressure to put more freight on the rail because it's a greener way of moving goods around. And at the moment, there really isn't room for very much more in the key sections leading out of London.
Yes, interesting, because there are some people who say there is a bit more capacity out there if you wanted not to build HS2. But as you say, the length of time that's involved here seems to be the problem. It was 2009 when Andrew Adonis first introduced the idea, and he said that the first part of the railway line, HS2, would be ready by 2020. Clearly that didn't happen.
No, it didn't, did it? And the reasons are many. Partly, I think, it's British planning laws, because the project was held up for years by people, mainly along the route, who were objecting to it.
Yes. And that, I suppose, is no longer an obstacle because they ended up compulsorily purchasing quite a lot of properties along the route. But as I say, it's an interesting kind of collection of people who are against it, i.e. the Green lobby appears to be against it, the Green Party appears to be against it, even though, generally speaking, they would be in favour of rail travel.
Yes, you would think so. I'm not entirely sure I understand the Green Party stance because they are against roads as a means of transport for everybody. They don't like cars and lorries. They say that rail is much more green, which it is in many ways, of course. And yet they come out against HS2. I would love to ask the Green Party, and they only have one MP. Her name is Caroline Lucas, and she represents Brighton Pavilion. I've met her once. She's a very nice lady, but I didn't have the chance to ask her, your party opposes HS2. What are you proposing to do about the capacity issue? I'd love to hear the answer.
I fear that the Green Party's main kind of plank of policy is that we shouldn't really go very far at all, and if we do go anywhere, we should go by bicycle.
Well, I suppose that's one way of looking at it. Unfortunately, the real world and certainly the economy of this country doesn't work like that. And sometimes you can have political ambitions, you can have dreams, you can have visions, but they've got to come back to earth with a bump sooner or later. And I think the time is just not here where we're all going to sit at home all day, every day and never go anywhere.
Yes, exactly right. And what about the kind of state of affairs with the budget at the moment? Because, of course, what we do know is that it was once scheduled to come in at $3 billion, then it went up to 20-something billion, then it went to 30 billion. We're now guaranteed to be over 100 billion. And I think a lot of people who are unsure about the efficacy of the project think that it's probably unlikely to come in on time, even now, in 10 years, and certainly not under budget.
Well, it's not guaranteed to be over 100 million yet. The ballpark figures are somewhere in the 80s. That figure of 106 billion that was bandied about for weeks and weeks after a copy of the Oakervee review was leaked actually came from an independent consultant, and the Oakervee review does not wholly support the figure. So the official figure...
Well, Grant Shapps was on Talk Radio this morning on Breakfast, and he said it was a £100 billion project.
Well, I think he ought to read the Oakervee review a bit more carefully. It was done for him.
Yeah, but I mean, let's face it, every capital project done in this country comes in way over budget. I would take a bet with you right now, Sim, that it will go over 100 billion.
I wouldn't be surprised if it did, but it's not yet guaranteed to be over 100 billion. Certainly it's a prediction I wouldn't like to argue with. It could well do, yeah.
Now,
Let's see what savings they can realise, though, because they are looking at efficiencies. And indeed, Mr. Shapps also, perhaps he said this morning, I don't know to you, certainly says it in the Commons yesterday, is not at all happy with the way the government developer HS2 Limited has been run and has been managing its money. So it could be that there could be a lot of reform there, and we could save quite a few billion. We don't know yet. That's speculation.
Yes, indeed.
It's a possibility.
And that is the problem, isn't it? That all of it is speculation. And by the time the work actually begins, although Boris Johnson has urged everybody involved to actually start laying the track sooner rather than later, you know, this is such a long-term project that by the time there's a train available to, say, Sheffield, I may well be dead, you may well be dead, you know, it may well be that it never actually happens until 30 years from now.
Yes, indeed. It takes a long time to do these things these days. When you think back to the early Victorians and the development of the railway network then, the Great Western Railway got its first Act of Parliament authorising it in 1835. 3 years later, they opened the first section for London to Maidenhead, and by 1841, just 6 years later, they were running through to Bristol. That is an amazing speed that we just don't seem to be able to emulate now.
No, that seems amazing, doesn't it? Now, what do you make of the story in the Times this morning that there's going to be this new high-speed north line in addition to HS2? How quickly can they get that organised? Because it seems to me that in the north of England, people don't necessarily want HS2, but they want better connections between cities in the north.
I think that's a priority in the north.
Nope.
And certainly there has been for a long time a real lack of efficient communication east to west, or west to east, if you like. Whether by road or rail, it's a long slog however you do it. And yes, high-speed north was a phrase coined by Mr. Shapps again. Goodness, what a part he's playing this morning. By Mr. Shapps again yesterday, and indeed by the Prime Minister. I think he was the first one to mention high-speed north. It's the new buzzword for ambitions to improve rail both in the north and to and from the north. And I think that the concern in the past was that if HS2 went ahead, then that would be at the expense of other rail projects. As I read what the Prime Minister said yesterday, they are determined not to do one or the other, but both.
Yes, and it seems remarkable that suddenly there's all this money available to do all this. Where is that all coming from?
Well, it will come from a very long period of borrowing over many, many years, bearing in mind, as you rightly said, you and I might not live to see trains arriving in Sheffield or Leeds, because the possible completion date for that is now 2040, if we're unlucky. That's a full 20 years, and the expenditure will be spread over 20 years. So even if we take 100 billion as the ballpark figure, that's 5 billion a year, which is a bit more bite-sized chunk, really. Nobody is expecting to find 100 billion in one money pot.
No, quite. And you said at the start of this conversation that this is an effort to make more capacity available, I suppose, for people travelling up and down the country. But is there any guarantee of that? Because I'm told the ticket prices on HS2 will be pretty high, so it will not necessarily be something which is available or usable by every single person travelling. And so will it really create as much capacity as it is hoped to do?
We have no way of telling what the fares will be on HS2, and anybody who claims otherwise is just guessing, and they're making it up as they go along, to be brutal. How can we possibly predict what railway fares will be on any line in at least 10 years from now and maybe 20 years from now? We might by then, who knows, have a policy that says railway fares should come down significantly and the taxpayer should pay more, which is certainly the policy in many continental countries, which is why commuting is cheaper in almost every country in Europe except Britain, because other governments put a lot more money directly into their railways.
Yes, they do.
However, the downside of that is that it doesn't grow on trees, not even in the European Central Bank does it quite grow on trees. And what it means is that income tax and other taxes are higher, which they mostly are. And indeed, you even pay VAT at a fairly low rate, but you pay VAT on rail fares in a number of continental countries. Yeah. So if we want 20% tax rate and we want ever-increasing tax-free bands, something has got to give, and therefore the people who choose to use the railway, certainly at busy times of day, which are the expensive times of day to run it, by the way, will have to pay more. It's a brutal reality. Yeah. You can't stretch a £5 note and magically make it into a 50.
Well, you can if you're in government, apparently. But, I mean, the point about the travelling public, I suppose, is that I don't know whether it's different in other European countries, but certainly in this country, as it was proven when the Labour Party tried to make it possible to give everybody discounts of a third on train travel, actually not a lot of people in this country by percentage travel by train.
No, but where they do travel by train, it's a huge number. If you ask how many people go from London to Bude by train, very few, because they'd have to change at Exeter and get a bus, because there's no railway to Bude.
Right.
If you ask how many people travel between East Croydon and London Bridge by train as opposed to road, the vast majority travel by train.
Yeah.
So you can't take into account trips that never could be done by train. You know, the school run, for example, there's no point in taking that into account, or taxi travel, because that's a different form of transport, and I'm afraid that's what these statistics sometimes do.
Yes.
The reality is that we've got over 1.5 billion people making journeys every year on the railway in Britain now. That has taken us back to the early 1920s, which was the all-time peak. And yet the railway is a lot smaller than it was in the 1920s. Every kilometre of track is arguably busier on average than it's ever been before. And I suppose the other point is that even if on the continent railway fares are often lower, it's this country that's seen by far the greatest growth in demand for rail travel. So something is going right. It's hard to see what, but plainly it is.
I think you're probably right. I think that certainly London is very well served by trains coming from all over the place. And if you're commuting into London, one of the things you don't want to do is sit in a traffic jam for 2 hours, and that's probably why the train services into London and out of London are actually not bad at all. However, I think there's huge swathes of the countryside, particularly up in the north of England, as soon as you get outside of the kind of M25 corridor, basically, where you can't go anywhere by train.
I think there is huge pressure on the rail network in the north because, again, demand has soared up since the turn of the century. When they let the Northern franchise in, I think it was 2003, from memory, it was assumed there'd be no growth.
Yeah.
And the franchise was set out with that in mind. That seems an amazing assumption to make now. And, of course, these days, the The problem is to contain the growth. The problem is to cater for the huge numbers of people who do indeed want to use the train. And it's particularly around the northern cities, Leeds, Manchester, Sheffield, Liverpool, Newcastle, that demand has gone up incredibly high in the last 20 years.
And what about the cost of the track? Because I'm looking at some stats in one of the papers today where it says that the original estimate for HS2 was something like £51.5 million per mile. It now looks as if that has ballooned to £321 million per mile versus only £26 million per mile in France.
Well, I think the conditions here are different, but I'm not an engineer, and I wouldn't really take it upon myself to explain exactly why that is, except that in Britain we are having to do a lot more in the way of ameliorating, good word that.
It is a good word, very well done.
Thank you, the effects of a high-speed line. And, for example, a lot of HS2 south of Birmingham will be in tunnel. And it will be in tunnel because the good people of the Chilterns rose up in their masses and said, no more railway here. You will put it underground where we can't see it. Okay, and that's what they are doing along a lot of the line. It is very expensive to build in tunnel, and in France, the high-speed lines are in very little tunnel because they're building across a much more open and unpopulated landscape. Let's not forget, the population of France is about the same as the United Kingdom, but France is twice the size. So they've got more room to play in, if you like, and it's cheaper to build a railway across a prairie than it is through a whole chain of towns and cities.
Yeah. So do you think that what appears to be the case today, which is that Boris Johnson has sort of overruled the will of most of the people, certainly that we talk to here and that we hear from, and gone ahead with this, but at some point or other in the future, it could be a long way in the future, everyone will go, well, I'm so glad they did that.
Well, we do have a parallel, actually, and that's High Speed 1, which is the modern term for the Channel Tunnel rail link from London to the Channel Tunnel. And indeed, the Channel Tunnel itself was bitterly opposed by large numbers of people in Kent, not least the Dover Harbour Board. But when it came to building the high-speed rail link from London, there was a lot more opposition, and it sounded very similar to the opposition we're now hearing to HS2. In these days in Kent, I think you'll find there may be some listeners in Kent. One of them would like to tell you what they think about HS1. But as far as I can see in Kent, the main complaint now is that not enough Eurostars stop at Ashford.
Yeah.
That's the main complaint. Otherwise...
And they go a bit too slowly as well. It's not as high speed as it should have been, really, is it?
Oh, yes, it's very high speed through Kent.
Not as high speed as it is through France.
It is.
Well, I've been on it. I can tell you it's not.
Well, the track speed through much of Kent is 300 km/h, which is exactly the same as France.
Well, I don't think they run it at that, but you're the expert. I wouldn't wish to argue with you about that. So what about the bus plan that Boris has got? What do you think of that?
Well, yes, buses. Not really my particular thing, but yes, the bus industry has decayed. It's gone down. We know that the passenger figures are lower than they were 10 years ago, and it's refreshing to see a government, particularly a Conservative government, which traditionally has been more in favour of private transport. You may remember Mrs. Thatcher and her great car economy. I don't think she cared much about buses, and she hated trains, well known.
Yeah.
So it's refreshing to see that turn. And yes, of course, it's vital. There are thousands, indeed, many millions of people not living in London who would love to have a bus service anything like as good, half as good, would be great. So putting in $5 billion, as I believe that's the figure,
that's the number,
to transport schemes, is a very welcome move indeed. And in fact, in some ways, it will affect and benefit more people than HS2 will. But it's a different kind of benefit. It will mean that people who don't drive, can't drive, don't want to drive, get much better transport opportunities than before. And I think you'd have to be pretty hard-nosed to reject that as a good idea.
I think you're absolutely right, Sim. Thank you very much indeed. Sim Harris, editor of RailNews, talking to us there as the spokesperson for the newspaper of the industry. He seems to think that HS2 will be a benefit in the long run, but the trouble is it's the long run. And I don't think most people who are currently alive really want it to be done. They don't want it to be built. They don't want that sort of money to be spent. There's a lot of different things that the money could be spent on. But will we be sitting here in 20 years' time talking about how happy we are that HS2 is such a great success? I very much doubt it, I'm afraid.